There are countries the world thinks it knows, a name that surfaces in headlines, a conflict summarized in a paragraph, a place the mind files under dangerous, or closed, or forgotten, and moves on. Myanmar is one of those countries. Speak that name in conversation, and the responses come quickly. The coup, the generals, the displaced millions, the cameras that can no longer enter. They are not wrong, but they are not seeing the whole country either. Because before the headlines, before the borders were redrawn, before the cities were renamed, before the silence descended like a curtain across this land, there was something else here. Something older, something stranger. Something that conquering armies have tried to erase and failed. That colonial administrations have tried to flatten and failed. That decade after decade of military rule has tried to suppress and failed. 10,000 temples built in 200 years by kings who believed. Civilization was something you carved into stone. Fishermen who balance on one leg at dawn, rowing with the other, as their ancestors did 5 centuries before them. Women who carry their civilization's history across their faces, in ink, in patterns, permanent as the hills that surround them. Dolphins that fish in partnership with human beings, as they have for generations beyond counting. And 500,000 monks who still rise before dawn, still walk barefoot through streets that soldiers patrol, still bow before altars that no regime has managed to close. This is not a country that has surrendered. This is a country that has outlasted everything thrown at it and is still here. In the dry central plain of Myanmar, where the Ayeyarwady River bends and the air smells of dust and incense, a civilization left its signature on the earth. Not in text, not in coin, not in the written record of conquest, in stone, in 10,000 towers of stone. At their peak, the kings of the pagan empire built more temples across 67 square kilometers than almost anywhere else on Earth. Temple after temple, pagoda after pagoda, stupa after stupa, erected between the 11th and 13th centuries with a speed and ambition that still staggers the imagination. That was 800 years ago. Mongol armies came, earthquakes came, centuries of neglect came. Colonial administrators came with their maps and their ledgers and their renaming of things. Military governments came with their curfews and their blackouts and their erasures. 2,229 of those temples still stand. They rise from the plain like the ruins of some impossible dream. Red brick stupas and whitewashed pagodas catching the first light of morning in shades of gold and amber and deep, cool shadow. Some are perfect, their spires intact after 8 centuries. Others have been broken by time and tremor, their upper levels collapsed, their interiors open to the sky and the birds that nest inside them. All of them are still here. At dawn, mist rolls in from the Ayeyarwady and spreads across the plain like a slow tide. Hot air balloons drift above in the silence, carrying travelers over a landscape that has no equal on Earth. Below, the temples glow, ancient and patient and undefeated. The name of this place is Bagan, and it is unlike anything else the world has made. The Ananda Pato, the most beloved temple on the plain, was built in 1105 by King Kyanzitta. Its golden spire climbs 51 meters above the red earth. Inside, 4 great teak Buddhas stand 9.5 meters tall, each one facing a different direction of the compass: north, south, east, west. The figures were carved with such precision that their expressions change as you approach. From across the chamber, the Buddhas appear to smile. As you draw closer, the expression shifts, becomes something more solemn, more knowing, as if they have seen everything that has passed across this plain, every army, every earthquake, every silence, and expected all of it. The Dhammayangi is Bagan's largest temple, and its most troubled. King Mrauk U built it in the 12th century, after murdering his father and his brother to take the throne. He ordered its construction as penance. The story goes that he demanded such precision from his bricklayers that any mortar joint wide enough to pass a needle through would cost the craftsman his hand. The inner chambers were sealed before completion. Some say by Mrauk U himself before his own assassination. Some say by the armies that came after him. No one has opened them. The That Bayan rises 66 meters, Bagan's tallest structure. Its name means omniscience, built to see everything. From its highest levels, on a clear morning, every tower on the plain is visible at once. 2,000 spires pressing to the horizon in every direction. A civilization that believed so completely in something that it wrote that belief into the landscape in stone. In 2016, a 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck the plain. More than 380 temples were damaged. Work began almost immediately to repair them. Because this is what this place does. It is broken and it returns. Bagan has endured for 1,000 years. It will endure for 1,000 more. Not all inhabitants of this land walk on 2 legs. Along the Ayeyarwady, Myanmar's great river, which runs 2,170 kilometers from the Himalayan highlands to the Andaman Sea, something extraordinary has been happening for longer than memory can reach. The Irrawaddy dolphin. It is not what you imagine when you picture a dolphin. No sharp beak, no tapered snout. A rounded, almost, blunt face, with small eyes and an expression that seems almost thoughtful. Grey-blue, stocky, built for river shallows rather than ocean depths. Fewer than 72 remain in the Ayeyarwady. For centuries, these dolphins have fished in partnership with human beings. The fishermen cast their nets into the dark water. The dolphins, somehow understanding what this means, circle the schools of fish, driving them toward the surface, toward the nets. The fishermen wait. Then the dolphins surface. They roll. They slap the water with their tails in a pattern the fishermen have learned to read. A signal passed down through generations on both sides of the partnership. It is not training. It is not captivity. It is something older. A relationship that evolved between 2 species that found, somewhere in the long history of this river, that they were better together than apart. Fewer than 60 villages along the Ayeyarwady still maintain this partnership. The dolphins choose their human collaborators. They return to the same fishermen year after year. When a dolphin dies, the village mourns. They are among the rarest cetaceans on Earth. Lost to fishing nets and boat strikes and the slow poisoning of a river that once ran clear. And yet every morning before sunrise, Somewhere on the Ayeyarwady, a fisherman climbs into his boat and waits. And somewhere in the dark water beneath him, a dolphin surfaces and stays. At the southern end of this country, where the Ayeyarwady spreads into a broad delta, and the land becomes water, and the water becomes sky, a city rises. Not the capital. Myanmar's capital is Naypyidaw, built in the jungle in 2005 on the orders of a general who consulted an astrologer for the optimal date to begin construction. A city of 8-lane highways with almost no cars. A city of monuments without crowds. Planned by a government that feared its own people enough to put 90 kilometers of jungle between itself and them. Above the city, above everything in the city, the Shwedagon Pagoda rises. 99 meters tall, covered from base to tip in gold leaf, donated by worshippers across 7 centuries. The apex is set with more than 5,000 diamonds, including a 76-carat stone at the very crown. Its silhouette is visible from almost everywhere in Yangon, a fixed reference point, a golden star held above the city's chaos. No, one knows exactly how old the Shwedagon is. The pagoda's own traditions hold that it was built during the lifetime of the Buddha himself, that 8 of the Buddha's hairs are enshrined within its ancient core. Archaeologists date the structure's earliest layers to somewhere between the 6th and 10th centuries. What is certain is that every earthquake, every fire, every invasion, every colonial appropriation has eventually released this place back to itself. The British used the Shwedagon as a military garrison during their occupation. They left. The pagoda remained. Japanese forces bombed the city from the air. The Shwedagon remained. Military governments have used the streets below it as a stage for their power. Their power has shifted and waned and reconfigured itself. The Shwedagon remains. On any given morning, thousands of worshippers climb the covered stairways. There are 4 of them, one from each cardinal direction, and emerge onto the great platform. Pilgrims in white, monks in red, old women in patterned longyi who have climbed these steps so many times their feet know the route without thought. They circle the stupa clockwise, as Buddhists have done here for 1,000 years. They light candles. They pour water over the Buddhas at their planetary post. They press gold leaf onto surfaces already thick with the prayers of centuries. And the pagoda stands above them, over the city, over the country, persistent and golden and quiet, unchanged by everything that has tried to change it. The road north from Yangon follows the river, or runs parallel to it, or crosses it, depending on where the bridges are and where the military checkpoints are not. 450 kilometers north, the land changes. The delta opens into drier plains. The heat thickens. The river bends. And the second city of Myanmar emerges from the dust. Mandalay. Its name carries the weight of 1,000 poems in a dozen languages. Rudyard Kipling wrote of the road to Mandalay, and the flying fishes playing, and the dawn coming up like thunder. He had never been there. The reality is less romantic and more extraordinary than any poem. Mandalay was founded in 1857 by King Mindon as the last great royal capital of the Burmese kingdom, built according to astrological calculation, its walls oriented to the 4 cardinal directions, its moat dug to a precise geometry. It was meant to be the center of the Buddhist world. 28 years later, the British walked in. They renamed it. They garrisoned the royal palace. They turned the throne room into a club. The palace was almost entirely destroyed during the Second World War, bombed by the Allies during their effort to dislodge the Japanese who had occupied it. What stands today is a reconstruction completed in the 1990s, faithful to the original plans. But Mandalay itself, the city around the palace, the city that grew through occupation and war and junta rule and economic collapse, that is not a reconstruction. That is the thing itself, still breathing. At the northeastern edge of the city, Mandalay Hill rises 240 meters above the plain. 240 covered steps lead from its base to its summit, or you can take the elevator if you prefer, though most people who climb Mandalay Hill do not prefer this. The act of climbing is part of the point. At every landing, there are pagodas. There are sitting Buddhas and standing Buddhas, Buddhas sheltered under ornate wooden roofing, and Buddhas open to the sky. There are views across the city below, the gold of 1,000 temple spires and the red dust of 1,000 streets, and the silver bend of the river in the distance. Near the summit stands a gilded Buddha whose pointing finger is aimed, according to tradition, toward the exact location where the city would one day be built, a prophecy made by the Buddha himself when he visited this hill during his lifetime, or so the tradition holds. The pointing hand is one of the most photographed images in Myanmar. Pilgrims touch it. Monks bow before it. It has been pointing toward the city for centuries. In the district of Amarapura, one of the 4 royal capitals that preceded Mandalay before the court moved on, the longest teak bridge in the world crosses a shallow lake. Ubain Bridge, 1,200 meters, 1,086 teak pillars, each one salvaged from the demolished royal palace of an earlier dynasty. Built in 1850 by the mayor of Amarapura, who was also named Ubain, using whatever timber he could source from the ruins of the old court. The bridge has no railing. It does not need one. The locals have been crossing it their entire lives, in bare feet, carrying loads on their heads, moving with the easy confidence of people who have done something 10,000 times. Monks cross it at dawn to beg for alms in the villages on the far shore. Fishermen cross it at dusk with their nets slung over their shoulders. At sunset, the lake turns the color of copper. The silhouettes of everyone crossing the bridge, monks, fishermen, schoolchildren, tourists with cameras, become a single moving line against the sky. The teak has been standing for 170 years. It was already old when the British arrived. It was already old when the Japanese marched through. It flexes slightly in the wind. The pillars tilt here and there with age. The planks have been replaced many times. The bridge endures. Across the city, in the quarter known as Mahamuni, a temple holds what may be the most visited Buddha image in the country. The Mahamuni Buddha is, by tradition, one of only 5 likenesses of the Buddha made during his lifetime and approved by the Buddha himself. It was cast 2,500 years ago. It was carried to Mandalay in 1784 by King Odapaya, who considered its acquisition the greatest achievement of his reign. The statue weighs 12 tons. Over centuries, male devotees, only men are permitted to approach, have pressed so much gold leaf onto its surface that the original bronze is no longer visible in most places. The accumulated gold is now 15 centimeters thick across the body. The face alone is left clear. It is cleaned each morning in a ceremony at 4 o'clock, attended by hundreds of devotees who have been waiting since before midnight for the right to watch. The tradition of cleaning has continued without interruption through colonial rule, through 2 world wars, through military coups and economic collapse and pandemic. Every morning, before dawn, the face of the Mahamuni Buddha is washed. It has been washed every morning for over 200 years. Nearby, in the monastery complex of Kuthador, 729 marble slabs stand, arranged in neat rows under individual whitewashed stupas. Each slab measures 1.5 meters tall and 1 meter wide. Each slab is inscribed on both sides with text. Together, they contain the entire Tripitaka, the complete canon of Theravada Buddhist scripture. It is sometimes called the world's largest book. If you were to read it, walking from slab to slab, reading front and back, spending a reasonable amount of time at each one, scholars estimate it would take nearly a year. King Mindon commissioned it in 1871, when he understood that colonial Britain was coming and would eventually arrive. He wanted the scripture preserved in a form that could not be removed or destroyed. Stone was his answer, stone that would outlast empires. The British came, as he knew they would. The royal palace fell, the courts scattered, the king died. The marble slabs remain, all 729 of them, intact, legible. The entire canon of a faith, written in stone, still standing in the city that was meant to be the center of the Buddhist world. In the workshops of Mandalay, in sheds along the river road, in family compounds where the sound of hammering begins before the light does, craftsmen practice arts that have survived everything this country has survived. Gold leaf, ground almost to nothing. A single gram of gold is beaten by teams of workers into a sheet that covers a square meter. The hammering takes 4 hours and 40,000 strikes. The resulting leaf is 0.0001 millimeters thick, so thin that a breath can scatter it, so thin it seems less like gold than like a memory of gold. This leaf is what worshippers press onto the Mahamuni Buddha, onto the Shwedagon, onto the golden rocks and sacred images and roadside shrines across the country. In Mandalay's traditional weaving district, the silk weavers of Amarapura still practice the achik pattern, a wave design whose precise geometry requires up to 300 synchronized bobbins and weeks of setup before a single thread is woven. There are 52 distinct achik patterns. Each one carries a name and a meaning passed down through generations. 2/3 of the old weaving workshops have closed in the past decade. The ones that remain still weave. South of Mandalay, in the highland plateau that the British called the Shan states, and the maps now call simply Shan, the land rises, and the temperature drops, and the valleys fill with a particular kind of morning light, thin, cold, silver-edged, that does not exist at lower elevations. And in that light, on a lake 880 meters above sea level, something moves. A man, standing in a small boat, one leg wrapped around a single oar, rowing. Inle Lake is 22 kilometers long and 14 kilometers wide at its broadest point. Its water is shallow, barely 2 meters on average. Its shores are thick with water hyacinth and lotus, and the floating gardens that have been cultivated on its surface for 5 centuries. The Intha people, sons of the lake, have lived on and in and around this water for longer than the records can trace. They built their villages on stilts above the water. They planted their crops on floating islands of anchored weed and compost. They moved their 5-day rotating market from village to village by boat. And they learned to row, in the specific way that you must row when your hands are occupied with a fishing net, and your balance must remain perfect, and the wind on a highland lake can come from any direction. They learn to row with one leg. The technique is called leg rowing, and it is unique to the Intha men of Inle Lake. The fisherman stands at the stern of his narrow boat, wraps one leg around the long oar, and uses the whole weight of the leg, hip, knee, ankle, foot, to drive the blade through the water in a circular motion. The other leg balances on the boat's edge. The hands are free for the net. The result looks to an outsider like something between dance and acrobatics. It is, in fact, simply the most efficient way to fish in a shallow lake while keeping both hands available. Efficiency arrived at over centuries, perfected by need. The fishermen go out before dawn, in the mist, with conical nets held above their heads, a shape that has been photographed so many times it has become one of the defining images of this country. They lower the nets over schools of fish. They beat the water with a long stick to drive the fish inside. They lift. The technique is 500 years old. It still works. The lake, though, is not what it was. Satellite data shows that Inle has shrunk by more than 30% since systematic measurements began in the middle of the last century. The water is shallower now. The hyacinth grows faster, choking the channels. The fish are fewer. Runoff from the farms on the surrounding hills carries sediment and fertilizer into water that was once clear enough to read through. The Intha men still row out before dawn. They still hold their conical nets above the morning mist. They row on a lake that is disappearing, and they have not stopped. Along the lake's edge and spreading out into the shallows, the floating gardens of Inle are among the most unusual agricultural systems on Earth. They are not land. They are not quite water. They are rectangles of matted lake weed, pulled from the shallows, stacked, anchored to the lake bed with long bamboo stakes. Dense enough to walk on, fertile enough to grow tomatoes and flowers and gourds and cucumbers. The vegetables grown on these floating islands are sold each morning at the rotating market, a 5-day cycle that visits 5 different villages in sequence, so that by the time the market returns to your village, 5 days have passed, and you have had time to harvest again. The system works. It has worked for 500 years. The floating gardens are a little smaller now than they were. The lake is a little shallower. The market still rotates. Every 5 days, the boats converge on the designated village, loaded with vegetables grown on water, and the commerce of a civilization continues as it has since before anyone now alive can remember. In the forests and marshes at the lake's southern end, where the water meets the reed beds and the reed beds meet the hills, something ancient moves through the morning. The Sarus crane. The tallest flying bird in the world stands nearly 2 meters tall. Gray-bodied, with a crimson cap, it moves through the reed beds with a deliberate, unhurried dignity that makes everything around it seem to be in a hurry. A mated pair will stay together for life, and Sarus cranes live for decades. Some pairs have been observed returning to the same nesting ground for 30 years. They mate for life. They mourn their dead. When one partner dies, the surviving bird has been known to refuse food and to stand at the edge of the water, calling for days. In Burmese tradition, the Sarus crane is a symbol of fidelity, of return, of the kind of love that does not require explanation because it simply continues. Season after season, generation after generation, as long as there is water and there is grass and there is a place to return to. Their numbers in Southeast Asia have fallen sharply. Wetland drainage has taken their nesting grounds. Hunting has taken their numbers. And yet, at the southern end of Inle Lake, in the early morning, a pair of cranes still rises from the reeds, still circles, still calls, still comes back. In the southeastern corner of Myanmar, where the limestone hills rise from the floodplains in shapes that seem to have been placed by hand, there is a boulder, just a boulder, except that this boulder, roughly 7.5 meters tall, weighing 611 tons, sits balanced on a natural rock ledge at the edge of a cliff at an elevation of 1,100 meters, with half of its mass overhanging empty space. The Shwedagon Pagoda, the Golden Rock, as the world has come to call it, is gilded, like so much of Myanmar, in layer upon layer of gold leaf. A small stupa crowns its surface. Below the stupa, within the rock itself, a strand of the Buddha's hair is said to be enshrined, and by virtue of that hair, the boulder does not fall. Geology offers a different explanation. The rock is seated in a natural socket in the cliff face that provides sufficient balance. But the geological explanation does not fully account for the slight but unmistakable movement that visitors sometimes observe. On still mornings, the boulder appears to sway, barely perceptibly, as if breathing. Engineers who have studied it cannot entirely explain this. Pilgrims have climbed the 11 kilometers of mountain path to reach this rock for over 1,000 years. Women are not permitted to touch it. They may view it from the platform, but the touching of gold leaf to its surface is reserved for men, who queue for hours at festivals for the privilege of adding their small square of gold to the accumulation. Slowly, century by century, the rock grows. The hair holds it. South of Kyaiktiyo, where the Karen Hills press toward the Thai border and the limestone turns to cave, the city of Bagan sits on the bank of the Than Uyên River. This is not a city that appears in many itineraries. It should. The karst landscape around Bagan is one of the strangest environments in Southeast Asia. A terrain of sheer limestone towers rising from flat rice paddies, pocked with cave systems so large that some of them contain entire temples. The Kagun Cave shelters thousands of tiny Buddha images pressed into its walls and ceiling, placed there, one by pilgrims across more than 1,000 years. The Shwedagon Cave is wide enough to navigate by boat. The Yathaipian Cave opens onto a view of the Than Uyên Valley, so dramatic it seems constructed rather than discovered. In the hills around Bagan, the Karen people have lived for centuries, farmers and fishermen and forest dwellers who have maintained their own languages, their own music, their own weaving traditions through occupation, through civil war, through decades of conflict with the Burmese military that has never fully resolved. Their longhouses still stand, their harvest festivals still happen, their harps, the saung-gauk, the only surviving arched harp in Asia, an instrument whose form has not significantly changed in 1,000 years, still sound. In the evenings, somewhere in the Karen Hills, someone is playing a harp that should not still exist. 600 kilometers north of Bagan, in the Shan plateau, where the air is cooler and the market towns smell of fermented tea and wood smoke, the town of Sepor sits beside a river named the Duthawadi. Sepor was once the seat of a Shan Sabwa, a hereditary prince, whose palace still stands on a hill above the town. In the 1950s, the last Sabwa of Sepor, a man educated at Cornell University in New York, returned home with his Austrian wife to modernize his small principality. He built schools. He extended electricity to the villages. He brought in agricultural techniques that increased the rice harvest. In 1962, the military coup came. He was arrested. He was never seen again. His wife waited for him for 4 years. Then she wrote a book about it and spent the next 40 years asking what had happened to him. She never found out. His palace is now a museum of sorts. His descendants still live nearby. The tea gardens of the Shan Plateau still produce some of the finest tea in Asia, fermented, pickled, dried, and consumed in forms that have no equivalent anywhere else in the world. In the tea shops of Sepor, elderly men still sit over chipped cups in the late afternoon light. They do not discuss the sorbwa, they discuss the price of tea, but they remember. In the far west of Myanmar, where the hills rise sharply toward the Indian border and the roads end and the paths narrow to single-file tracks through bamboo forest, the Chin people have lived in their mountain villages for thousands of years. Most travelers never reach Chin State. The few who do find a landscape of extraordinary wildness. Mount Victoria rising 3,000 meters from forested ridges, cloud forests thick with endemic birds, villages of bamboo and teak clinging to slopes that seem too steep to hold them. And in those villages, in the oldest households, something is disappearing. The last tattooed women of Chin State. The tradition is more than 1,000 years old. Young girls of the Chin people, between the ages of 11 and 15, received tattoos across their entire face. Not decoration, not initiation alone. The patterns were deeply specific. 8 distinct clan designs, each one a visual signature of family, lineage, place. The ink was made from pine soot. The instrument was a bundle of thorns. The process lasted several days and left permanent marks. Spirals, dots, geometric lines, fine hatching across cheeks and chin and forehead. In the 1960s, the Burmese government banned the practice. The last generation of tattooed women is now in their 70s and 80s. They are the final human records of this tradition. When they die, and they are dying now, each year, each dry season, 1 or 2 more, the visual language will be gone. But they are still here. In the villages above the clouds, in houses built on steep hillsides, the last tattooed women of Chin State sit in the afternoon sun. They show their faces without embarrassment. They are not sad about their tattoos. They are, for the most part, proud. They have outlived the government that tried to stop them. Southeast Asia is one of the last places on Earth where Asian elephants survive in significant numbers. Myanmar holds between 1,400 and 5,000 wild elephants, one of the largest remaining populations on the continent. This country has always had elephants. For centuries, the kings of Burma went to war on elephant back. The royal white elephant, an animal of pale, almost albino coloration, was a symbol of sacred power, so significant that kings went to war to acquire them. The Siamese and the Burmese fought several wars over white elephants in the 16th century. The wars were called, in full historical sincerity, the White Elephant Wars. Today, Myanmar holds the world's largest population of captive elephants, roughly 5,000 animals. They were trained, over generations, to work in the logging industry, hauling teak from forests that could not be reached by machine. In 2016, the government banned commercial logging. Overnight, the elephants had no work. Their handlers, the mahouts, some of whom have worked with the same elephant for 30 years, were left with enormous animals they could not release and could not employ. The elephants, too old to return to the forest, too socialized to survive without human contact, now live in a kind of unemployment that neither they nor their handlers know entirely how to navigate. In the forests of the Ayeyarwady Delta, wild herds still move through the remaining jungle. They travel the same paths their ancestors traveled. They remember routes to water sources that no longer exist, having been drained for farmland decades ago. They still try the paths, they still look for the water. They endure in a landscape that has changed faster than memory can track. Rising from a volcanic plug in the dry zone, an isolated column of rock 337 meters tall, surrounded by the flat plain on all sides, stands the mountain of Mount Popa, the mountain of the spirits. Myanmar is a country of Buddhism. 91% of its people identify as Buddhist. But Buddhism here sits alongside something older, something that predates the pagan empire and the arrival of the Dharma in this land. An animist tradition of spirit worship called Nat. 37 great spirits, formalized by King Anarata in the 11th century when he understood he could not eliminate the old belief system and decided instead to incorporate it. The 37 Nats were once humans. They died violently or unjustly or under circumstances so dramatic that their energy could not simply disperse after death. They became spirits. They require appeasement. Mount Popa is their home, or rather, the volcanic plug adjacent to Mount Popa, a sheer column of rock called the Tong Kalat, where a monastery clings to the summit and 777 steps lead upward through a corridor of monkeys. The monkeys are not incidental. They are the descendants of pet monkeys belonging to the Nat spirits. They regard the pilgrims with the proprietorial indifference of animals who know they are on sacred ground. Twice a year, at the Tongbyon Festival, one of the most important Nat festivals in Myanmar, more than 200,000 people gather at the foot of another hill, far to the north of Popa, to honor two brothers who died unjustly 8 centuries ago and became great Nats. The spirit mediums, the Nat Kador, wives of the spirits, dance. The offerings are brought. The petitions are made. And the spirits, who have been waiting since the 13th century for exactly this kind of attention, are satisfied for another season. The Indo-Chinese tiger. Once it moved across every major forest in Southeast Asia, from southern China to the tip of the Malay Peninsula, from the coast of Vietnam to the hills of this country. The most powerful predator in these forests. The animal that, in Buddhist tradition, carries the dead to their next life in its jaws. Today, the Indo-Chinese tiger population across all of Southeast Asia is estimated at fewer than 350 individuals. In Myanmar, fewer than 20 have been confirmed. 20. In the Hukang Valley of northern Myanmar, the world's largest tiger reserve, at nearly 18,000 square kilometers of protected forest, camera traps occasionally catch a glimpse, a flicker of striped gold at the edge of the frame, a paw print in the mud beside a stream, the mark of something that was here and then was not. The Kachin people of the north have a saying: the tiger does not announce its presence, you know it was there only after it has gone. In the remaining tiger forests of Myanmar, the soldiers and the loggers and the poachers have all left their marks. Logged clearings, snare lines, road cuts through habitat that took centuries to grow. The tiger leaves its mark too, more quietly, more patiently. And so far, barely. It is still leaving marks. In the far west of Myanmar, where the country shares a border with Bangladesh and the Bay of Bengal begins, the land rises into the ruined capital of a kingdom that the rest of the world has largely ceased to remember. Mrauk U. 600 years ago, this was one of the wealthiest cities in Asia. The Artisan kingdom, named for the coastal people who built it, controlled a stretch of coastline from the Ganges Delta to the Irrawaddy. Its port handled Portuguese merchant ships, Mughal ambassadors, Chinese traders, and ships from the Dutch East India Company. Its king commanded the loyalty of 500,000 people. Its palaces were built of stone, imported from across the Bay of Bengal. The kingdom fell to the Burmese in 1784. The royal family was taken. The religious relics were carried off. The city was abandoned. The jungle returned. Today, more than 700 temples survive in the hills around Mrauk U, invisible from most of the town, hidden in vegetation, reached by paths that locals can navigate without thinking. The Shwedagon Temple, the temple of 80,000 Buddhas, has corridors so dark that a flashlight reveals carved Buddhas and worshippers and battle scenes emerging from the wall like something dreamed. The Shwedagon holds 90,000 Buddha images, all carved within 6 months on the order of a king who wanted to surpass his father's temple in a single, ambitious gesture. These are not secondary sites. They are, for sheer density of surviving Buddhist art from a single medieval civilization, among the most significant archaeological sites on Earth. Almost no one visits them. The civil war has made the roads unsafe. The Rohingya crisis, which began here in Rakhine State, where the Arakan people and the Muslim minority population have lived in terrible proximity and terrible tension for generations, has made the region politically fraught for any traveler. And so, the temples of Mrauk U stand largely alone. 700 temples in the Burmese jungle, in a kingdom the world forgot, waiting for a peace that has not yet come. In the southernmost reaches of Myanmar, where the Tenasserim Range presses toward the sea and the mainland tapers to a narrow arm pointed at Malaysia, the coast dissolves into islands, 800 of them, maybe more, depending on the tide. The Mrauk U archipelago. Closed to the outside world until 1997, the Mrauk U Islands were one of the last truly inaccessible archipelagos on Earth. Their waters hold more than 500 species of coral, vast reef systems that developed undisturbed through the decades when the military government simply refused to allow anyone in. The islands above the waterline are thick with primary rainforest, their beaches inaccessible and unnamed. The sea is extraordinarily clear. Visibility underwater can reach 30 meters on calm days. The fish schools have not learned to fear divers. Among the islands, in boats so narrow they seem barely wider than a man, the Moken people still move. The Moken are called sea gypsies in the language of those who do not know what else to call them. They number perhaps 3,000 to 4,000, distributed across the islands of Myanmar and Thailand. They live on their kabang, traditional houseboats that are also homes, also kitchens, also the entirety of what most people would call a settled life. Moken children learn to swim before they learn to walk. They spend so much time in the water that their underwater vision develops beyond any documented human norm. Studies have found that Moken children can focus clearly underwater at distances that would be blurry for virtually any other child on Earth. Their eyes adapt in ways that took researchers decades to fully understand. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami killed tens of thousands along the coastlines of Southeast Asia. Among the Moken, casualties were almost zero. They had watched the sea. They had read its behavior. They knew, from patterns accumulated over generations of living on the water, that the sea was about to withdraw in an unusual way, and they moved to higher ground hours before the wave arrived. They understood what the ocean was saying in a language that the rest of the world could not read. But the extraordinary things in Myanmar are not only the ancient and the imperiled, they are also the daily. The long yi, the tube of fabric that every person in Myanmar wraps around their waist every morning. Men tie it in a knot at the front. Women fold it to one side. It is the same garment across every ethnic group, every class, every political affiliation. In a country of enormous diversity, more than 135 recognized ethnic groups speaking dozens of distinct languages, the long yi is the single shared visual grammar. It is worn in rice fields and in parliament buildings, in temples and in offices and in boxing rings. It has been worn this way for as long as anyone can remember. And the thanaka, a pale cream paste ground from the bark of the mariah tree on a flat stone, wetted with a little water. Applied to the cheeks, the forehead, sometimes the nose, in circles or swirls or careful patterns. It cools the skin in the heat. It filters ultraviolet light. It smells faintly of sandalwood. Thanaka has been worn in Myanmar for more than 2,000 years. Ancient texts reference it. Stone carvings depict it. Colonial-era photographs record it. It is worn today by children on their way to school, by women in the market, by monks at their morning prayers, by men working in the fields on bright mornings when the sun comes early and stays late. In a country where so much has been suppressed or disrupted or taken, Thanaka has simply continued. There was no movement to preserve it, no government campaign to save it. It continued because it worked, because it was beautiful, because it was woven into the ordinary fabric of life too deeply to be removed by anything so blunt as a political decree. This is the other kind of persistence, not the dramatic endurance of temples and endangered species and imprisoned leaders, but the quiet, daily endurance of the small things that make a life recognizable to itself. And then there is the country itself, the present one, the one that exists right now, while these words are being spoken. Myanmar has been at war with itself almost continuously since independence in 1948. The specific combatants have changed. The map of who controls what shifts month by month. But the essential fact that the people of this country have been asked, by the most difficult circumstances imaginable, to simply endure has not changed. In February 2021, the military arrested the elected government in a pre-dawn raid. The country that had, briefly and cautiously, begun to open, that had allowed elections, permitted journalism, welcomed travelers, was closed again. The response was immediate and extraordinary. Doctors walked off hospital wards, civil servants refused to work, teachers left their classrooms. Hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets of Yangon, of Mandalay, of Naypyidaw itself, holding up the three-finger salute from a film about a fictional dystopia, which had become somehow the universal symbol of resistance. The military responded the way it always has. More than 6,000 civilians have been documented killed. 3.5 million people have been displaced. 20 million people need humanitarian assistance. The country that was opening has closed again. The country that was closing is fighting back. But go to Yangon on any morning. Go to Mandalay. Go to any town that still has a monastery, and you will see something that no coup and no crackdown and no military decree has managed to stop. Before the light, before the street food vendors open their stalls, before the traffic begins, the monks come out. 500,000 monks walk through Myanmar every morning before dawn, in bare feet, in robes of saffron and dark red, carrying their alms bowls in the precise manner their tradition prescribes. They walk in silence. They accept what is, offered without thanks. Gratitude is not part of the exchange, because the exchange is not a transaction. The householders who give receive merit. The monks who receive give the opportunity to give. The act flows in both directions. This morning ritual has continued for more than 1,000 years. It continued through the colonial period, when British officials watched with incomprehension from their carriages. It continued through the Japanese occupation, when soldiers patrolled the same streets. It continued through the coups of 1962 and 1988 and 2021. In 2007, tens of thousands of monks joined the pro-democracy protests that swept through Yangon, placing themselves between the protesters and the guns, walking with their bowls inverted in the ultimate gesture of Buddhist condemnation. They were tear-gassed, some were beaten, some were killed. The military that claims to protect Buddhism attacked its own monks in the streets. And the next morning, the morning after the crackdowns, the morning after the tear gas had cleared from the air, the monks came out again, before the light, in bare feet, with their bowls. The Shwedagon stands above the city tonight, in the way it always stands, lit from below, its gold more vivid in the dark than in the daylight, its apex catching the last of whatever light exists in the sky. It has stood here, above this city, above everything this city has been through for at least 1,000 years. There are things in this world that outlast the systems that try to own them, that outlast the empires that claim to have built them, that outlast the governments that claim to control the people who believe in them. The Shwedagon is one of those things. The faith it represents is another. And somewhere on the Ayeyarwady, somewhere in the darkness before the fishing boats go out, in the stretch of river where the water is still clear enough to see the riverbed, a dolphin surfaces. One of 72. It breaks the surface without drama, breathes, settles. It does not know it is endangered. It does not know that researchers have been counting its kind for decades with increasing alarm. It does not know about the coup, or the fishing nets, or the slow poisoning of its river. It knows the river. It knows the fishermen who wait on the banks before dawn. It knows, in whatever way a dolphin knows anything, that the partnership holds. It surfaces again, closer to the nearest boat, and waits. There is a question that gets asked about Myanmar, in conference rooms and diplomatic briefings, and the offices of people who study this kind of thing professionally. The question is, how long can a people endure? The answer, the one that the temples of Bagan suggest, that the monks who come out before dawn suggest, that the tattooed women of Chin State suggest, that the Moken sea gypsies, navigating reefs they learn to read in childhood suggest, is something that the people asking the question already know, even if they have not yet found the language for it. Longer than you think. Longer than the systems that try to break them. Longer than the silence. This country is not finished. The temples are not finished. The traditions are not finished. The people who live inside them and carry them forward, who press gold leaf onto ancient stone, and who row with one leg at dawn, and who still speak the old languages, and weave the old patterns, and teach their children the names of the old spirits, they are not finished. Myanmar has been here for 1,000 years. It has been broken and rebuilt and broken again. It has survived everything the world has thrown at it with a stubbornness that is not passive. It is active, intentional, daily, chosen. This is what endurance looks like when it is not heroic, when it is simply people getting up in the morning and doing the things they have always done, in the places where those things have always been done. Because to stop would be to lose something that cannot be recovered. They have not stopped. If this journey has moved you, if these temples and these rivers and these people have stayed with you in some way, there is more to explore. Subscribe to the channel and follow along. The world is full of places the headlines have forgotten. We will keep going. Thank you for watching. Until the next journey.